Go. Unfortunately, the winner can't join us this year because she's ill. I'm going to have ex-captain Sean Brennan read the essay for her, and if her parents can come up right now, we can join us up on the podium.
So Emma asked us to read her essay. I hope we can do it justice. Why should we never forget 9/11? I can give you almost 3,000 reasons why we should remember what happened that day. One for each civilian, firefighter, and policeman who woke up that morning, started their day, and never came home. I was born in 2005, and this tragedy was something I only learned about in school and from my parents. But just by listening to people talk about it, I knew it was different. 9/11 was more than just one day. We're still feeling its effects 2 decades later, and unfortunately will feel them for many decades to come. Too many families have an empty seat at their table. Too many parents lost children, and too many survivors walk around feeling guilty that they survived when others didn't. Psychologically, physically, and in some cases even spiritually, that day never ended. Years later, 9/11 is still taken from us. In 2021, the September 11th Victim Compensation Fund released its 20th anniversary report with a shocking result. They believe more people have died from 9/11 related illnesses than were actually killed in the 2001 attacks. Why should we never forget 9/11? When people talk about 9/11, they talk about who was responsible. Too often in stories like these, we focus all our attention on the bad guys, the villains, the ones who stole thousands of innocent lives. Instead, we must remember 9/11 to honor all those heroes who rose up to help their fellow Americans both that day and those still suffering years later. We need to ensure that 9/11 isn't just a story about who hurt us, but more importantly, it's a story about who helped us. My father is an Air Force veteran, and every Memorial Day I hear him say, "We all gave some, but some gave all." Many first responders died years later from illnesses they developed from working at Ground Zero on the pile. Police officers, firefighters, EMTs, Good Samaritans, and survivors have become sick or died due to exposure to noxious dust, chemicals, fumes, and fibers causing numerous types of cancer and a multitude of other medical conditions. Val Velasquez-Stentz, a New Jersey police officer. Barbara Burnett, a New York City police detective. And Amit Friedlander, who at the time was 17, my age now, and a senior at a high school blocks away from Ground Zero, developed illnesses such as cancer and Parkinson's disease from 9/11. My town of Oceanside has its own hometown hero, Louis Alvarez. I will not stand by and watch as my friends with cancer from 9/11 like me are valued less than anyone else because of when they get sick. You made me come down here the day before my 69th round of chemo. I'm going to make sure that you never forget to take care of the 9/11 responders. This was part of the speech he gave to Congress as he, along with others, fought for the 9/11 Victim Compensation Fund. And due to their perseverance, the program will continue to be funded through 2092. Mr. Alvarez is not the only victim of 9/11 in our community. We also lost Janice Ashley, James W. Barbella, Joshua David Birnbaum, Timothy Aaron Haviland, James Joseph Kelly, Laura A. Marchese, Jeffrey Nussbaum, William E. Spitz, and Mark Scott Zeppelin. Why should we never forget 9/11? Survivors are still struggling mentally. I read about Janice Brooks, the woman who got out of the World Trade Center but can still close her eyes and recall the horrors of that day. New York City firefighter Joe Casalighi, who was a friend of my mother, was in one of the closest firehouses to Ground Zero. He responded that day, but his equipment wasn't working, so he was forced to leave the World Trade Center. He has spoken candidly in a 9/11 special on the horrors that day and eventually left that firehouse because of the trauma and survivor's guilt. 9/11 was very personal to New Yorkers. It If we don't remember it, then it just becomes another lesson that we learn in school. My mom says everyone remembers where they were and what they were doing when it happens. She was in a subway under the World Trade Center and had to be evacuated. My dad was working in Times Square, and once the first tower was hit, everyone was immediately sent home. One way we locally honored Mr. Alvarez was by establishing a local park in his name. Lady Alvarez, his widow, called it a place where one can come to reflect about life, to find a sense of peace, clarity, and connection with nature, each other, and most importantly, with themselves. I had never come to this park before I started writing this essay, but I'm glad I did now. I felt a sense of gratitude and respect for not only Mr. Alvarez, but for all who were lost that day and those that we lost in the decades after. Why should we never forget 9/11? Whether they were a victim of the crash, first responders to the crisis, or just good Samaritans doing what they could to help their fellow Americans, it is important to remember what was lost that day. Some gave their lives, thousands gave their health, and countless more their mental well-being. All gave some, and some gave all. It's our job to honor their sacrifice and to be their voice. The best way to keep something like this from happening again is to never let anyone forget what happened that day and the cost that was paid by so many.